All right, welcome. Well, today I am pleased to introduce, on behalf of the Talks at Google program, author Gregory Orfalea. Greg was born and raised in Los Angeles and educated at Georgetown University and the University of Alaska. He is the author or editor of 8 books, I guess 9 now, including The Man Who Guarded the Bomb and Angelino Days. The recipient of many awards for his writing, Greg's Angelino Days won the 2010 Arab American Book Award and was named a finalist for the PEN USA Award in Creative Nonfiction. He has taught at the Claremont Colleges, Georgetown University, and Westmont College. Greg is here today to talk about his most recent work, Journey to the Sun, Junipero Serra's Dream and the Founding of California, an authoritative and incisive biography of the man who founded California's missions. Combining European and American history, religious scholarship, geography, and anthropology, Greg masterfully recounts the story and brings new information to our knowledge of a man whose massive cultural project not only created the blueprint for modern California, but changed the future of our nation. Please join me in welcoming Greg Orfalea.
Thank you, Shannon. Who is God's companion? Junipero Serra might have contemplated this thought on the road in the Salinas Valley of California, where in 1771 he met an Indian woman who offered him a present. When he asked her name, she murmured Soledad, Spanish for solitude. Or at least that's what he heard. I was astonished, and turning to my companion said, "Here, gentlemen, you have Maria de la Soledad." He gave her glass beads for seeds. She nodded. As the name stuck to the place, Serra made a note to found a mission in that desolate, treeless spot. Soledad later became the hardest luck mission of them all. Serra had undergone plenty of solitude. The soledad of the trail, the one that surrounded your neck like water at night. A soledad to conquer by singing matins at first light. Not English or American soledad, which celebrated being on one's own without others. Spanish soledad, which longed for them. Serra was not about soledad, neither were the Franciscan fathers. He'd swallowed his fill of it as a boy, losing 2 sisters and a brother, working the quiet fields of Petra, his home village on the Spanish island of Majorca. But his father's hand, that leather hand, was always on his shoulder, and later his confreres' abrazos. Even those strangers in the confessional cut Soledad with their pain. Serra respected solitude, the solitude Christ felt in the garden, the last night of his life when the apostles slept. But Serra wasn't Simon of the desert standing on his pillar alone. He loved community, loved performing marriages. He traveled as much as he could in a pair or group, because outside the mission walls lay a solitude so vast, only the sun could disperse it. Now the dew was on the leaf, the earth shorn briefly of dust, dark and lovely and cool. The sun began its climb of the Santa Lucia Mountains, casting them in gray outline. As his mule snorted, taking him north in the early morning, the sun regarded Serra. He dared not look back. The sun, warm on his forehead, rising over the crown of the forest, now arched in his mind above the Tramontana range of his old island and its olive groves to the sea. The Mediterranean waded into the Pacific, the sun wrapping the world in its arms. Who was God's companion? He was. For a second, he looked at the sun. God put a white spot in his eye. Anybody here ever looked at the sun? Not supposed to do that, right? And just to show you how complicated the choices are for a writer trying to bring an 18th century figure back to life, I still don't know if those spots are white or black. I chose white, though, in this case. What I just read you was the prologue to the book, Journey to the Sun. It's barely more than a page. At one time, it was about 20 pages. My editor, whose name is Colin Harrison, is an accomplished novelist, told me to throw out the 20 pages of the prologue, throw out the 10 pages of the preface, throw out the 30 pages of the introduction, everything at the beginning. And this is what his rationale was. Colin said, I want the reader to encounter Sarah's story right from the start and be pulled in by the force of it, by that and that alone. I don't want you parsing it or indicating up front what the reader should expect or look for. I want him captured. And in a way, that's kind of like falling in love, right? Nobody explains to you why they feel that way. They just do. You just do. I hope that's what a good book does. You know, the work on the prologue was only the first of many waves of editing the manuscript. It was 1,300 pages at one time. A good part of just 2013 alone was this relentless onslaught to bring it down. I mean, there was blood all over the floor. You know, Sarah martyred many times. My own editor had an idea. My own editor, Colin Harrison, actually, and my provost at Westmont College, had a title for a talk. I've given 2 different kinds of talks for the past 2 weeks on this book tour. One is a general summary of Sarah's life, but I'm going to do something different for you Google folks, because I think you're sort of natively ready for something different. I'm going to give you the talk I gave my own faculty, which is, I'm going to give you 5 major obstacles I had to encounter in writing this book. 5 challenges about, dealing with the life of Father Serra and indeed researching it. And here they are. I'll summarize them for you, and then we'll go down one by one. Number 1, how to transcend the regional critique. Oh, Serra? That's a California story. No New York publisher is going to be interested in that. Okay, so the regional critique, how to get over it. 2, how to deal with the fact that half of Sarah's life is document poor and half of it is document rich. Number 3, what is the pivotal moment in the Serra story? Not so easy to figure, and we'll explore that. How to understand the fact of floggings in the missions. A tough one. That's number 4. And number 5, what techniques, writer's techniques, what can I bring to bear after writing for 30 years? What tricks do I have in my basket? And research goals could I best marshal to bring a celibate Spanish priest of the 18th century to life for a jaded, if not cynical, American culture. That's probably the hardest one of all. Okay, now I want to say at the outset, let's make this interactive in a way. We can do the Q&A in general at the end. Shannon, I'd be happy to do it. But jump in if you feel, you want more on something. As we go down these 5 obstacles, I'll pause after each obstacle to see if you want to throw in another obstacle. Okay, first, how to transcend the regional critique. Anybody have an idea? How would you transcend the regional critique? It's only a California story, right? Nobody's going to be interested in Junipero Serra. We already have William Bradford and the Massachusetts Bay Colony. We have Captain John Smith at Jamestown. What do we need Serra for? All right, I'll go into it. I wrote the first outline in 2001, so it's a 12-year journey. I toiled alone without an agent for a long time with that outline and a sample chapter. No success. Even my own former editor, I had a great editor at the Free Press, which is another subsidiary of Simon & Schuster, for a book on World War II about my father in the war called Messengers of the Lost Battalion. My editor was Adam Bellow, who's the son of Saul Bellow, the Nobel Prize-winning novelist. Adam's a pretty well-educated guy. He went to Princeton. He'd never heard of Serra. Never heard of him. So to me now, I thought I was holding on to a hopeless obsession. Even my old editor wasn't going to take it. One day, a friend of mine from Georgetown days, my undergraduate days, his name is Jason Berry, who loved what I was trying to do and was gung-ho about it from the start, said, my agent, send an outline and a sample chapter to my agent. I think he might look at it. Now, Jason is an interesting person. I don't want to get too off track on him, but I will just say that Jason Berry was the first author to uncover the pedophilia scandal in the Catholic priesthood. And he remained a Catholic after 25 years of writing this hellish story. I have often told Jason, there's the book you got to write. Why you stayed after all that misery. Well, maybe Francis I is the better part of it. So, Jason's agent, Steve Hanselman, took a look, and he got it. And why did he get it? Because he was born in Shafter, California, right outside of Bakersfield. But he was living and working in New York. So he loved it, and he knew what it was all about. Steve Hanselman understood that the Serra story was one that was important to him from childhood. In fact, since the 4th grade. Now, how many here did a 4th grade mission project? All right. Which mission, Mike? Remember which one you did? I see that was a mission you really loved. Shannon, do you remember? Carmel, San Carlos Borromeo. I just was there. Love that mission. Mine was San Juan Capistrano. Anyone else? Anybody do San Gabriel down in L.A.? That's a good one. Anyway, Steve Hanselman had done San Juan Capistrano too. Steve was convinced that Serra badly needed a realistic, unbiased treatment, one that was both celebratory and critical. He was convinced that the story had ripple effects far beyond California and could tell us much about the origins of the Hispanic-influenced country we were becoming. So we went at it, and we totally revised the outline and the sample chapter, but we were turned down by 12 publishers. even with a gung-ho agent. However, just when I was going to give up, isn't that the way it always is? Just when you're about ready to pack it in, you get a little tinkle of a bell on your phone or at your door. And in this case, it was Colin Harrison at Scribner. You know, the best publisher and the best editor, in my opinion, in New York. Colin, and this is kind of what he said, I'm sort of paraphrasing. I am interested in alternate foundation stories for this country, and this is certainly one we know almost nothing about. And, you know, I thought, well, that's how it works. You're lost, and then by dint of a kindred soul, you're found. Now, the flip side to the regional critique immediately hit me. Now we have a contract, we have a pretty decent advance, I'm raring to go. The critique about the smallness of the story suddenly becomes the reality of an immense story. So what's the fear now? Am I up to it? Can I handle this? I'm a literature guy, not a historian, although I've written histories. My background is literature and writing. So what can I bring to this task that's different? Well, I thought maybe, you know, what's literature most fascinated with? Character. Character, person. That's what I want. I want to get into the character of Serra. I want the people to walk in his sandals and know what it was like to live in the 18th century and to do what he did. Luckily, I had an editor that divined right away that I was insecure. And bolstered me almost from the start. He gave me his cell phone, his private cell phone. I could call him on the weekends. This has never happened to me before. Happens to very few authors who aren't bestsellers. He said, we're going to go at it chapter by chapter, and we did. 22 chapters. We had 22 conversations of an hour or more on the phone for each of those chapters. Uncanny. Okay, yeah, the question is what drew me to Serra? Well, actually, the answer to that is the regional critique. I was part of California. I don't know. At the earliest memory I have as a child is about 2.5 of holding a bird or having a bird land on my upturned arm at San Juan Capistrano Mission. And the bird was pecking the bird seed out of my hand. There's a photograph of it, but I hadn't seen the photo in many years, and in my mind I thought, oh, it must be a swallow, because, you know, the swallows come back to Capistrano on March 19th, St. Joseph's feast day, and I thought I was part of that. Well, it turned out it was a pigeon. But that early memory and that sense of sacred space, the sense, too, of going to Georgetown in the East for college, feeling like nobody understood things that were really close to me from California, the assumption that, you know, there's no history. Californians are ahistorical. They're trying to escape history. That's why people go west. Well, people went west after the Spaniards were there. There's a lot of history before the Americans get here, and that's what I want. I think I was building up the instinct to do this for many years, particularly in the East at Georgetown. Okay, challenge number 2. How to deal with the dearth of material on Serra's early life. Up until Journey to the Sun, there was, in fact, only one extant letter of Junipero Serra up to his leaving Spain forever at the age of 36 from Cadiz. Okay, so I said one letter for the first half of his life before he set sail. That's not a lot. 5 letters for Mexico. He was in Mexico for 18 years, longer than he was here. So 6 letters up through age 54. I found 2 in my journeys. Doesn't sound like a lot, but you guys know better than I what that is. A 33% increase. So I feel pretty good about that. I also should mention that part of this problem with a dearth of material, the challenge is you got to become not just a historian, but a sort of investigative reporter. And you've got to travel. I did 5 trips to Spain and Mexico. You've got to focus on the myths like a laser, especially the ones that are most controversial. And I've done that, I hope, in Journey to the Sun. Also, the challenge comes how to weave a story progression through the creation of 9 missions. That's a challenge in itself, because no mission's story stops with the creation of a new one. So you're weaving this man's life story through the 9 missions, which is part 3 of the 4 parts of the book. And you've got a chapter for each mission, but then they interlace. For example, just a quick example. The pivotal moment of the story, which I think I'm coming up to that soon, is the attack on San Diego mission. But the attack on San Diego mission occurs in 1775. Mission San Juan Capistrano is being founded. So I have the attack on San Diego in the San Juan Capistrano chapter, and those are the kind of things you have to deal with. Now you may wonder, why is the Serra story so document poor, for the first 36 years of his life? Anybody have any just random guesses or thoughts? There's quite a few reasons. Okay. First of all, he taught at the Lullian University. He had a chair in theology. He was a very respected, erudite theologian in Palma at the time. That university, the Lullian University in Palma, was closed in 1835, and a lot of the records and sermons probably and lectures were lost. How about 1936 to 1939? What was going on in Spain at that time? Civil War, to which I would compare the Syrian civil war today. I think that's the one terribly tragic and bloody parallel to what's going on in Syria. The Spanish Civil War had Franco wiping out anything having to do with Catalan identities. Towns, Basque or Catalan. Everything was to be Castilian. The language, the Catalan dialect, he destroyed the dictionaries. So, Palma and Majorca is part of Catalonia. So it's very likely we lost Serra, or at least many of Serra's holdings, at the time of Generalissimo Franco. So when you see Guernica, the next time you see that great painting by Picasso of Guernica, with the explosions in San Sebastian and Bilbao, think about we lost Serra right there, or at least records of Serra. I did unearth 4 sermons of Serra to Claretian nuns in the 1730s that very few had ever seen before in Spanish, and someone had done a sort of bad English translation in the 90s that I found in Majorca. I added my own translation, and that really helped me with his way of thinking about God and grace and suffering. Walking the streets where Serra grew up in Petra, being taken around Palma by a seminarian who was living in the same hall in the Convento de San Francisco in Palma that Serra had lived in as a young priest was invaluable. In Barcelona, I sustained the terrible triad. I don't know if any of you have ever broken your elbows before, but like an idiot, I chased a thief out of the metro and hit a little escalon, which, we don't have in our metro, a little tiny step, and went flying as I was chasing him and smashed my elbow against stone and broke 2 bones, the radial, the ulna, and tendon came off, and they call that the terrible triad. So my wife and I spent a week in a hospital in Barcelona, all in the service of trying to find some original documents of Serra's. And in fact, I did come up with an original letter which revealed several things that couldn't possibly be seen in the transcription. I actually held Serra's goodbye letter to his parents in my hands, given to me by a Capuchin monk in Barcelona. I have to put the white gloves on and hold it. And I saw two spots, which I'm going to share with you soon. Two spots on the goodbye letter. Now, what do you think two spots would be in a goodbye letter to parents? Llora. Tears. Yeah, that's my guess. Could be moisture damage, too. I mean, but that was sort of my feeling. I also uncovered in Oaxaca, after some relentless research and coming up empty for days, I found the name of a man who was having a 14-year affair with a woman who confessed it to Serra. Now, we knew about this unknown person's confession. We didn't know the name of the man. It's briefly discussed in a 1787 biography by a friend of his, Francisco Palou, and then dropped for 200 years. Briefly mentioned in 1959 by Father Maynard Geiger, the last major biography. I thought, whoa, I want to find out who those people were. And I did. And once I had the name of the man who was carrying on the affair, Don Matias Cortabarria, I ran around Oaxaca to 5 archivists. And, archivists love it when you give them something, They just love, they sit around in these kind of dreary jobs all day long, dust of the archive. And it's pretty grim. But when they have something and they know someone's on the trail of something centuries back, they love it. And they just really worked hard for me and found many of these names. Okay, any questions about, the document poor, document rich? I should say the document rich part of the story is that once Serra gets to California, you have 264 letters. So it's a bumper crop. Now it's what do you do? What do you use? What do you throw out and what do you use? Okay, number 3. The third obstacle, trying to pin down the pivotal moment, because a lot of the editors prior to Colin taking it want to know, okay, what's the fulcrum here? What's the fulcrum of the story? I struggled at first. I thought maybe it was Serra's decision to leave everything. He never went home. He never saw his parents again. He was so nervous about saying goodbye to them, he couldn't address the goodbye letter to them. He addressed the goodbye letter to a cousin who was a priest and said, give it to him. Could that be the pivotal moment? Well, maybe, but what do you do then? If that's the pivotal moment, he's still got half of his life left. That doesn't serve. How about the spider bite at Veracruz? When he first landed in Veracruz, when he was 36, he was bitten by a spider. Walking from Veracruz to Mexico City, 250 miles. It festered, it necrotized over time, and it pained him for 25 years, the rest of his life, walking all over California. Pretty serious, pivotal moment, but a little amorphous, too. What was it? His despair after the Cortabarria incident. I didn't mention this, but the man who was having the affair with the woman that confessed to Serra, when he realized that the woman was not coming back to him, he hanged himself. And, this had great repercussions in Oaxaca and affected Serra. How about Serra's meeting with the viceroy in 1774, when he went all the way back from Carmel, down through Baja, over on ship to San Blas, to Mexico City, and pleaded with the viceroy not to shut the whole project down because there was a terrible epidemic almost of molestation by the soldiers of the Indian women, which Serra totally, decried and fought, but he was worried because no one was stopping them. The comandantes were not cashiering these soldiers that the viceroy was going to end the project to California. In the end, I picked the incident I mentioned to you, Serra's reaction to the murder of Father Luis Jaime, who grew up with him in Mallorca during the second attack of Mission San Diego by the Kumeyaay. And I'll read just a brief little part of that, and then we'll run to the end. In the wake of the second major Indian uprising in California, Serra sat down December 15, 1775, to write a soul-searching letter to Viceroy Bucareli in Mexico City. I should mention that although the attack took place in San Diego, Serra was not there. He was in Carmel. Carmel was his home mission. So he didn't get the news for a couple weeks. But when he did, and he knew that Indians had been arrested, at least 9 and then later a total of 24, to be executed, they were on death row, he had to act fast. So he wrote this letter. He contemplated the burned, shredded baptismal records, the stolen vestments and utensils of the sacristy. He hovered on giving up. He reminded Bucareli of his insistence at the beginning of these conquests, quote, that in case the Indians, whether pagans or Christians, would kill me, they should be pardoned. From the very outset of the Spanish movement into Alta California, Serra seemed to sense violence was inevitable, and he wasn't going to return it, nor did he want the military to return it. Serra's insistent note to Bucareli was not only exceptional in its anticipatory mercy, it seemed to beg the question of the whole enterprise. This is a stunning position. It's almost as if Serra were asking for forgiveness, not only for the Indian, but from him, knowing what the Indian was going to have to give up, even if he felt he was offering a better way, salvation, as he understood it. So, Serra attacked the clemency simply and profoundly, and I'll give you the exact quote in his writing, in his letter to Bucareli. To prevent the Indian from killing others, let the soldiers protect us in better fashion than they did the now deceased padre. And as to the killer, let him live so that he can be saved. For that is the purpose of our coming here and its sole justification. In short, the gospel of love. All right, the fourth challenge. Yes, sir. What happened?
Did the letter take effect?
Bucareli was deeply moved. He ordered all the Indians released. In fact, one of them, probably the leader of the attack, Carlos, whose native name was Chisley. Carlos and his brother Francisco, they were both in on this rebellion, became very close to the missions. Particularly Francisco. I think he was a leader of the Christian Indians in San Diego. Carlos kind of went in and out of, he was a bit of a recidivist. But he ended up at Carmel, ironically, after Serra died, and had his family there and worked the mission in Carmel. The fourth challenge was how to deal with the most troubling, if not revolting, fact of Father Serra's life, that he allowed and even advocated floggings for penance and discipline in the missions, often against the very Indians he was otherwise protecting. I'll only say here, I was faced with a twofold problem, a moral one and a narrative one. The first was easier to confront. Serra was wrong. There's no way to gainsay it. Despite the fact that disciplinary floggings were commonly used in schools as well as prisons throughout Europe, Serra should have had the wisdom to be as ahead of his times in this area as he was in others. The narrative problem was tougher. If I tackled the issue of floggings too early, I might lose the reader's commitment to the Serra story before it even began. And although I sprinkled references to the floggings in the book prior, I don't focus intensely on it until the last night of his life. and it's the end of part 3 of a 4-part book. And that night, I begin the chapter actually with this quote from that night. Sarah says, "I have come under the shadow of fear." That's when I deal with the floggings. It's hard to explain them away, but you have to remember that, this was a sort of utopic community, the mission. And the Indians were not forced to come in. That's a myth. It wasn't slavery. It was a kind of indentured servitude, though, because once they were in, then they were committed to a community that needed their work, that they were given clothes, they were given food and shelter, and a home. At a time when, lots was going on in the native villages. The germs were spreading, the microbes were out and about, and a lot of Indians were dying. So the mission, and I say this at one point, the great irony of the California missions is that they were both protection and exposure. The Indians were seen as children, not, how can I say this? We've all read some books where the Padres refer to their flock as my children. I don't think it was, you're inferior than me, but it was a kind of way of regarding the neophytes, as they were called, as newcomers in the Christian faith. As such, the number of the thrashings was half of what an adult would get, quote. That's 12 versus 25. That still doesn't make it right. Personally, I think probably the worst thing about the thrashings was not the physical pain, but the humiliation. People would steal. There was adultery that went on. I don't have to tell you what went on in New England with adultery. They didn't whip you. They burned witches at the stake, who they thought to be witches. We have to be careful in writing history of what's known as the presentism, problem. To judge the past with our present, our present attitudes and moral standards. Still, like I say, and I make no bones about this, I think it was wrong. Yes, sir. It was actually part of the whole Spanish project, and in fact it was part of the English project. The English thrashed their students at prep schools such as Eton. What was it? Four thrashings was a scrubbing. 6 lashes was a Bibling. And Eton. So, this was the standard of the time. I suspect it was probably not much different in Asia. Unfortunately, corporeal punishment or corporal punishment was a standard. Now, I will hasten to say that even during Serra's time, people took issue with it. One of the governors took issue with it, and he got into a big argument with him in 1780, and I mentioned that. By the 1820s, it was abolished throughout the Spanish lands. So although it was the standard, it was beginning to come under question. To move forward to the last obstacle, and then we'll open it up. The last obstacle was, in the words of Frank Buck, how to bring him back alive. Another way of stating this is how to make the Serra story neither hagiography, and hagiography overly praising or excessive adulation of the subject, nor broadside attack. In short, how to make Serra a real man. One way to do this was to make those who came to save, that he came to save for Christ, real men and women. That is, the Indians of California. So I had to do a lot of research about Indian culture. As those of you who have written books know, or people who've organized them, been involved with researching, organization is theme. I tried to effect a kind of ecumenism by dividing the first 2 parts of the book like this. Part 1 is Serra before California, and part 2 is California before Sarah. Then we combine them in part 3, and then it's after his death and the sainthood issue in part 4. So it's pretty simple, but there was a method to my madness. Another method of bringing him back alive was to bring back alive the women he loved, which included the Blessed Mother herself, his sister and mother, Maria Contreras in Oaxaca, that's the woman who confessed to him the affair, and Maria de Agreda. Has anyone here ever heard of the 17th century nun, Maria de Agreda? I had never heard of her before I started this story. She was said to have bilocated 500 times from Spain, Agreda, Spain, to New Mexico. And in the book I say, well, there's a spiritual frequent flyer if there ever was one. It's quite a story, Maria de Agreda, but all this to say that other than his Bible and his divine office, the only other book that Serra had in his bag all over California was The Mystical City of God, written by Maria de Agreda, a 4-volume novelistic treatment of the Blessed Mother. You know, anybody here interested in women's studies, take a look at that book. Not too many women novelists in the 17th century. And here's one writing 4 volumes about Mary. Serra was entranced. Another way I tried to, bring him back alive was to use fictional techniques about nonfiction. And that is, occasionally I will put, interior thoughts in italics. I try not to overdo it. I always ground it in the real record. And when the record runs out, I'll sometimes use the subjunctive mood. And my editor said, oh yeah, the subjunctive will be the salve for the wound. Beyond research for new primary and secondary material and the somewhat risky techniques was the matter of walking in his shoes in Majorca, mainland Spain, Mexico, and the 2 Californias. This was exhausting, exhilarating, and for me at times deeply humbling. The Serra story is interdisciplinary from start to finish. You must steep yourself in the art he loved, his theological models, the history of the times, the history of the church, music, literature, geography, and the environment. And finally, I had a field day envisioning the beauty of our wondrous state through the eyes of one who fell in love with it for life, causing great hope and great pain for its inhabitants. And I'll leave you with this short paragraph of Serra traveling south, looking out on the water. Troubled before La Assumpta. La Assumpta is an Indian village near present-day Ventura. Serra saw something out in the blue of the calm morning, a wound on the sea, a lambent dark red. The kelp beds like a stigmata on the water. At the hottest point of the sun, he might have climbed off the mule, taken to the sea, the water making his robes heavy but his heart light. Close up, the kelp was golden, its pods upright in the water. The kelp leaf could pass over his face like a hand. God, he loves suffering for this beauty. Thanks. So, a couple of quick images and then we'll call it an evening. This is Mount Ronda in Majorca, a beautiful upsurge of mountain. They're all over the island, and there are sanctuaries and monks, monasteries up there. And this is where one of Serra's models, the 13th century monk Raymond Lull, claimed to have seen a vision of Christ crucified while he was living his dissolute life, sort of like St. Augustine in his 20s. Raymond Lull was writing a letter to one of his lovers, and he saw this image of Christ crucified on Mount Ronda, and it was a place that Serra loved. Here's Soler. Now, what does that remind you of, that landscape? California. So I always say, Serra left home to go home. It's beautiful. If you've never been to Majorca, just you won't regret it. This is Soler, which is where the olive press, the great olive press was. And Serra and his father would take the olives on a mule train over the mountain, the Tramontana, down into Soler, which was a port town, and put the olives in the great grinder. There he is. Now that's probably the only painting he really sat for, but we're not even sure that he did. But we guess around 1773. We think it was José de Paez, who was a great Mexican painter. He looks a little fraught, I'd say, puzzled. The copy, the original, if it ever existed, is no more. This is one extant copy, and it's at Mission Santa Barbara. So if you ever want to see it, that's where it is. Okay, the goodbye letter to his parents. Now I flipped it. This is the fourth leaf. Remember I was talking about the spots on the goodbye letter? Let's see. Can you see it here? There's one way up here, and then one down here. I don't know if you can see it. It's not quite focused, but it's there. Also, take a look at how he finished the letter. This is the actual letter. This is the margin, and on the side of the leaf, he just couldn't stop saying goodbye. Goodbye to please express goodbye to my cousins, Jose, and please say goodbye to the baker down the street in Petra. He just filled this with goodbye. It's obviously a very painful letter. And then he ends it, cordial amigo in Cristo, your cordial friend in Christ, Junipero Serra, indigno sacerdote, which in Latin is unworthy priest. But look at this. There's a little squiggle here. And I think, and you wouldn't see this unless you saw the original, that he had it as superlative. It's not indigno, it's indignissimo, which means most unworthy priest. All right, here's North America in 1663. You see California? It's this huge island. And that's what California was taken as for a long time. Into the middle of the 18th century, California was thought to be an island. And in this case, it's half the size of, continental United States. This is the founding in Monterey, the great painting called The Founding. The painting is 1877, but the event was 1770, the second mission. This is the Vizcaíno oak. It's no longer there today, but there was an earlier mass done in 1602 by the explorer Sebastián Vizcaíno, and it lasted for many years until it finally rotted and was thrown into the bay when they were building a train in about 1905. Probably one of the more famous trees in American history. I mentioned Maria de Agreda. This is a picture of her I got from Zacatecas in Mexico. Here's Maria, and she's sitting next to one of the evangelists. Can you guess which one? The four gospel writers. It's John, St. John. And they each are wielding a pen. Writers, and this is the name of her great book on Mary. I mentioned to you the last night of his life was great fear had come over him. This is the Great Fear painting. If there was any doubt that that's what he had said, very soon, he died in 1784, so 6 years later there's a painting about this moment. It was legendary even then. And it would have to have been transferred by his very close friend and first biographer, Francisco Palou. Here's Sarah in the middle. This is Palou himself doing last rites. Can you see? It's not easy to see it. Maybe over here more easy. There's a face above Palou. Can you see it? It's very difficult to see on this project. That's an Indian chief. And on the left is probably Governor Pedro Fages, who clashed with Serra constantly. I love this painting. It's shown in Carmel Mission once a year for the week before Christmas, and it's Mary being visited by St. Elizabeth, who's pregnant with John the Baptist, and Mary, of course, is pregnant with Christ. The painting was done around 1500, and it is in the Uffizi in Florence, the great Uffizi Gallery. This is a copy, and the copy, a very good one, is in Carmel Mission. Oh God, forget him. I'm out the childhood window, and the last picture will make my wife. She's in the backyard of Sarah's home in Petra. Looking a little, oh, Greg, isn't it time to go? Well, thank you.